You're watching Reality Check. Has the government fixed the jobs problem by suppressing unflattering jobs data? Here's the context. Since 2017, the government has stopped the existing surveys claiming they were flawed. The National Sample Survey Office Employment and Unemployment Survey stopped in January 2014. The Labour Bureau's annual Employment-Unemployment Survey stopped in September 2016. The Labour Bureau's quarterly employment survey stopped in March 2018. In their place, new surveys were announced, the results for which were expected by the end of last year. In April last year, the BJP's IT cell head Amit Malviya tweeted a link to a piece by Jayant Sinha, saying in his tweet that India's problems is not jobs but the missing data on jobs. In the Times of India story, Jayant Sinha is quoted as saying that definitive data on employment will only be available in September 2018 when the Niti Aayog survey will likely be published. But here we are, halfway into January, and there is no sign of the new surveys. But the last such survey done by the Labour Bureau may offer a clue as to the government's reluctance. This survey was conducted in August 2016 to March 2017, immediately straddling the period of the note ban, but its findings buried. These findings were first accessed by Business Standard and now reviewed in even greater detail by NDTV's Mariam Alavi, and they paint an unflattering picture. It shows joblessness was at a 6-year high at the time of the survey. Mariam now joins me on the show. Mariam, now you've got into this survey. What exactly are the things that it's telling us?
Yes, Vasu. So this is the 6th annual employment-unemployment survey that was done by the Labour Bureau, but the results of which were never published. This was first accessed by Business Standard, as you rightly mentioned, and we have reviewed some extracts from the report as well. So our source within the Labour Ministry tells us that this was done between August 2016 and March 2017. The survey was conducted at this time, so the quarter immediately after note ban. So it gives you a little bit of a perspective of what would have been the impact of the demonetization move of the government. It was the source also claims that it was seen by the Minister of State, but it hasn't been published yet. The report is ready. So one of the major things that pops out from the report is that the unemployment numbers, the unemployment rate is at a 6-year high. The total unemployment has risen from 5.4%, from 5% in 2015 to 16 to 5.4% in 2016 to 17. This is the highest since 2011. Urban unemployment is at 6.1%, again higher than the 4.9% in the previous year. Rural employment, however, was slightly better than the national average. It stood at 5.2%. Females seem to be worse off than men when it comes to unemployment. Female unemployment has risen to 9.2%, which is higher than the 8.7% that the government had reported in the previous year. Whereas for men, the unemployment rate is far lower, which is at 4.3%.
Okay, so these are some of the big findings from this so-called missing report, this so-called buried report, which is basically telling us that unemployment after the note ban hit a 6-year high, hitting 5.4% in the 16-17 period, and particularly you're saying the urban unemployed and women are the worst hit, with their numbers spiking compared to some of the other parameters that you went into. Now, you were trying to tell us, Mariam, that this report was finalized almost a year ago and is effectively gathering dust in the Labour Ministry?
So, ideally, the report should have been published much earlier. So, the latest such a report has come out so far, with the previous 5 reports, is in the January in the next year. So, it should have been ideally been here by 2017 or latest by 2018 January. But that hasn't happened yet. So, it's almost a year late now. Yes.
All right, Mariam, thanks very much indeed for that. All right, let me just go across to panel, some of whom at least who are joining us may not be necessarily surprised by these findings. Professor Jayati Ghosh, who teaches economics at JNU and who's also been the author of a book which looked at the impact of the note ban, and Mahesh Vyas, Managing Director and CEO of the Centre for Monitoring the Indian economy joining us from Mumbai. We're going to have more voices as well joining us on the show very shortly. But you first, Jayati Ghosh. I mean, no real surprises here with this report, which is suggesting that unemployment has spiked after the or in that immediate period, succeeding the note ban. But it is, of course, somewhat almost bemusing that the government would, having stopped some of these labor surveys,
please don't interrupt the man speaking.
sit on these reports, not release them. Jayati Ghosh, if you can hear me.
Are you asking me, Vasu?
Yes, Jayati, yes. I'm asking you.
Yes, I can hear you. Well, I think this is just part of the whole situation where the government is destroying every institution, including, unfortunately, the institutions that were very, very highly valued in India that generate our statistics. And this is one more example, the fact that we are now going to have labor force surveys that are not comparable to the earlier large surveys, the fact that you do annual surveys which you do not release the data for. These are not just terrible news for the citizens, but they're also foolish for a government, because you cannot take policies in a situation of ignorance. You cannot formulate strategies to get out of a mess if you're not willing to actually see what kind of mess you're in and what is the nature of that mess. But it's not surprising, because everybody who looked at the situation rationally expected that there would be a significant deceleration and a loss of employment after the note ban. The current data that you mentioned actually understate the problem, because it refers to the whole year, of only 1/4 of which was the period after the note ban. So it's very likely that subsequent data, if they're ever released, if we ever get hold of any such surveys, will be much, much worse.
Right. Mahesh Vyas, now, CMIE's reports, the CMIE also does a fairly extensive employment or unemployment survey, has systematically found that there have been job losses, worsening job losses. In fact, your most recent report or your most recent finding, put that graphic up on the screen, has actually pointed out to how 11 million or 1.1 crore jobs were lost in 2018 alone. Do you also agree with Jayati that the findings of this sort of buried report are not surprising and actually maybe an underestimation?
It's very likely that this is an underestimation, but I find the burial of the report or not releasing the report to be quite amusing, because the report does not apparently contain anything significantly damaging. If it says 5.4%, 5.9% unemployment, this is broadly in line with what the trend has been. So it doesn't show any sharp deterioration.
Right.
It wouldn't raise all kinds of negative noises. So I find it actually very amusing that the report was actually buried. The second thing which I think is important from the numbers that you have read out so far is it looks like the survey was conducted in the middle of the year 2016-17.
Mm-hmm.
So these numbers do not capture the impact of demonetization almost at all, because the numbers always are based on, if it is usual status, principal status based numbers,
yes,
then you ask a respondent whether he was employed or she was employed during a better part of the year.
Right.
Which means if you're asking somebody in January 2017, he or she is giving the status for the previous 12 months. So this
Right.
is not taking into account the impact of demonetization almost at all.
Okay, that's interesting. So just because it straddles the period of demonetization or several months after demonetization, you're saying that because of the methodology, it may actually not capture the full impact of demonetization. But the fact still remains, and Vivek Reddy, also of the BJP,
Right.
joining us on the show. Welcome, Vivek. And also Amit Basole, Associate Professor at the Azim Premji University and also the author of a jobs report. The fact remains, Vivek Reddy, that we seem to be in a very unusual position where the government has decided that they will simply bury the bad news. So a report by the Labour Department, which is not very flattering, is buried. New surveys are promised, which was supposed to be out by September of last year, and there's no evidence, or there's no sign, there's no indication of
Well,
when
I
these
think,
surveys are coming out.
Well, I think, Mr. Srinivasan Jain, we are looking at a small slice between March 2000, latter part of 2016 to the early part of 2017, that is March 2017. I think this slice is too small, if at all these figures are correct. This slice is too small to look at a broader appreciation of the entire economy. This is one. The second issue is perhaps the point made out by Amit Malviya and Jayant Sinha is perhaps very true, because it's very hard to get a real status about the Indian economy due to lack of measures, or lack of detail, and lack of a machinery to correct the detail with respect to the actual numbers on unemployment.
But
So
Vivek,
therefore,
the point is,
even there might be a problem.
But Vivek,
But the issue is this.
no, Vivek, just a second. Vivek, one second. Vivek, one second. When you talked of Amit Malviya, and when you talked of Jayant Sinha, they actually said that the problem is not jobs, the problem is jobs data. But then the answer was that there would be outcomes or results of the new surveys commissioned by the government by September. We're now into the middle of January, and there's no sign of where these new reports are. So what you've done is you made the jobs problem vanish by making the data vanish.
No, the job data you will have to get if you have an effective machinery to reach the data. India is a large country. When you say labor, you cover both the agricultural sector, the service sector.
But where are
and
these
manufacturing
surveys?
sector.
No, but
So
you're
therefore,
reflecting. Where are the
if you have to
where
get
are
that
the new
data for
surveys?
the whole of India.
Where are the new surveys which
It
were
will come
supposed to be out
out.
by
We'll have
September?
it will come out. But where is?
By when?
But unless the government has the machinery, so Mr. Srinivasan Jain, what I'm saying is, unless the government has the machinery to collect proper data, precise data. This is not like mathematics. You will not be in a position to get the exact position. But the larger issue is this.
But you were
If
supposed
look at
to.
the last.
But you're supposed to improve. Sorry,
if
hold
you
on.
look
You
at
were
the
supposed to
last
improve
5 years.
the methodology. That's what the government promised. You almost seem to be suggesting that
Yes.
they're not able to do it. But let
The
me just move
government-
across to. Okay, I'll come back to you. If I can just bring in
Government will
Amit
do it.
Basole.
But I have just one point to make.
Can I come
Just
back
one
to you?
point to make, Mr.
Can I come back to you? I'll come
Srinivasan
back
Jain.
to you because I have to rotate the strike.
No, just
I have to
one point,
rotate the
because
strike.
unless and until I say that it's not complete.
Okay.
Just one point.
Okay, quickly.
Yeah, the short issue, yes, thank you. The short issue is this, Mr. Srinivasan Jain. You have to look at also the indices which we can assess today. There are some real indices where this assessment is possible. For example, India has grown from the 9th largest economy when Mr. Modi took over to the 6th largest economy, and is about to get in as the 5th largest economy in the world. So therefore, these indices, are really matter.
Okay.
And that shows that that shows that India is demonstrably moving forward in the world.
Okay, fine.
And this shows that there is no unemployment problem.
All right, Amit Basole, what do you make of, again, just to summarize for those who may not be aware, but your report, the Azim Premji report, which came out in September of last year, suggested, number one, that employment shrank by 70 lakhs between 2013 to 15, and that growth was creating fewer jobs. This was the Azim Premji report. Now, what do you make of this, of the fact that you stopped the existing surveys, the NSSO surveys and the Labour Bureau surveys, but then you don't come out with the fresh data? So how do we know what the real jobs picture is in this country?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there has been some unnecessary amount of confusion on this. Part of this we knew was coming because there was already talk of moving to a new data architecture a few years ago, and there was talk of making the NSS surveys annual as periodic labor force surveys. The Niti Aayog task force said the same thing. So it was not unanticipated that we were going to move to a new architecture, but it hasn't been handled well. So this particular 6th report has been delayed. The PLFS hasn't yet come out, should be coming out shortly. And a lot of policy confusion could have been avoided over the last 2 years by laying out a clearer roadmap, letting people know what to expect, when the data was expected, what was going on exactly.
Do you think
Instead, a lot of energy went into EPFO and other ways of looking at employment which are not valid.
Do you think that one of the reasons why they're not coming out with the new numbers is because the new numbers aren't very flattering?
Well, I couldn't really speculate to that. We have been in a regime where unemployment has been growing. So it's possible that, and of course the government has been under pressure on the jobs issue, but I can't really say as to why the delay happened.
Okay, well, I'm going to come to Mahesh Vyas in a second, but before that, and back to Jayati Ghosh, but before that, I want to play a clip of our colleague Mariam Alvi, who actually tried to find out where these new reports went from ministry to ministry, and this was the outcome.
मैं मरियम बोल रही हूँ NDTV से सर नहीं है हेलो हेलो हेलो
Despite repeated phone calls, emails, and even visiting their offices 3 times now, officials at the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation have been unavailable to meet us. The Secretary of the Ministry and the DG of the National Sample Survey Office have been out of town until Monday, according to members of their staff. However, on Monday morning, when we once again visited the offices, they were busy and unavailable to meet us, according to their staff members. A member of the Niti Aayog suggested that we speak to either the Vice Chairman, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, or member, Mr. Bibek Debroy, with regards to data on jobs and employment. However, Mr. Debroy's office told us that he was out of town until Monday, and on Monday he was too busy and unavailable to meet us. Mr. Kumar's office, on the other hand, told us that he wasn't meeting any journalists until after the budget session. Even at the Ministry of Labour and Employment, we tried contacting multiple officials, including the offices of the Minister of State, the Secretary, the Additional Secretary, the DG Statistics, DDG, and the Senior Labour and Employment Advisor. However, the officials were either unavailable to meet us or refused to speak to us on camera.
Mahesh Vyas, what's your take? I mean, do you think that, as I was asking Amit earlier, that do you think one of the problems is that the government just wants to now bury the bad news?
First of all, the news of the Labour Bureau report is not as bad.
Right.
The second thing, it is quite possible that the government is fighting to keep bad news away. My experience with government economists, at least, is that they have fought very hard to battle with bad news that CMIE releases. So it's quite possible that they could be exerting pressure within the government to not let what they perceive as bad news to be. It's very likely.
Do you face pressure, or have you faced any pressure to sort of not come out with your reports?
No, no one puts pressure on us to not come out with the reports, but there's tremendous battle on the credibility of CMI's data. So the first narrative is that there is no data available on employment and unemployment when CMI releases this information regularly. Then comes the refrain that there is no reliable data, and so on and so forth. So a denial is in a sense a pressure. And there are other indirect pressures on the information saying that these don't tell the entire story, and confounding this with other information like EPFO, which makes little sense. So there is indirect pressure. There is massive pressure to discredit the information. You cannot stop CMI from releasing information, and that doesn't happen very easily.
Right. Yeah.
But we did see pressure in financier of our survey being stopped, or actually stopping the financing of the survey.
Right. I mean, as journalists, we also understand the many nuanced ways in which pressure can be brought to bear. But you stand, Mahesh Vyas, by your numbers, including this latest rather devastating figure that you came up with about 11 million jobs being lost in 2018.
That's right. The numbers came out on 31st December. We released it on 1st January. There was no fuss about it. The numbers come out automatically. The survey happens every day. They go into a machine. The machine churns out estimations as per a known program. And we didn't fuss over it. We came out of the numbers. We gave a caveat that these numbers will be revised by late January, early February. That will not make a material difference to the number. The number is devastating. It is a very big number, but it's an honest number. There's a huge loss of jobs, mostly women, and it's across rural and urban sectors. So this is really a serious problem.
Right, Mahesh Vyas, I'd love to, for you to stay on with us, but as I understand, you don't want to get drawn into a political debate, so I'm going to thank you here. But I'm going to come to Jayati Ghosh. Jayati Ghosh, you were saying at the outset that this is worrying not just because of the fact that it's telling you that there is an unemployment problem, but because of the fact that this government is systematically eroding our capacity to collect and put out credible data. What do you think is the way out of this? I mean, do you think that it's time now for some of those within the government who are part of this data collection process to actually push back and say, look, you can't do this. We have to maintain the credibility of the institutions and of our legacy of data collection?
I completely agree with you. I think it's absolutely time for a pushback. I only wish there were more people in government who were willing to actually stand for what these institutions are supposed to do. And particularly the statistical agencies, they are supposed to be independent of the government. It's pointless if they become servants of a master determined by, the political vagaries and whichever party happens to be ruling. The point is to produce information that can be used not just by society at large, but even by the government. It is absolutely foolish for a government to think that it can just skim through and con everybody and pretend that, let's say, employment is getting much better if it's actually getting worse, because that will not enable it to address the problem. And I think it's absolutely right. I think what Mahesh Vyas says makes a lot of sense, because their survey data at least correlate with what else we see in the economy. We see rural distress, we see the short-term distress migration, we see the evidence of huge numbers of people applying for jobs that pay very little and have relatively low security, and yet they continue to apply and don't get these jobs. We see around us various other indicators that tell us that this is an employment crisis.
Okay.
And therefore, to pretend that you can somehow wish away that crisis by imagining all kinds of other employment which you cannot tell us about because you don't have the right data, that's absurd. And it's counterproductive even for the government.
Right. Vivek Reddy, this ostrich in the sand approach, I mean, you have your own Labour Bureau data, this missing report which we just reported on. Unemployment at a 6-year high, this was in 2016-17, may have got even worse now. Mahesh Vyas, CMIE, I mean, this is a non-partisan professional organization, telling you that 11 million jobs were lost last year. How long will the government continue to be in denial?
Vasu, let me tell you that all of this data, particularly the CMIE's data, comes with a lot of riders. This is not based on hard facts. This is not based on hard field surveys throughout India and not across all the sectors. So these are private surveys. They come with a lot of limitations. You can't
just say that.
We cannot speculate.
They're all surveys.
No, you cannot speculate because these are not official figures. A private body has come out and said, though a reputed private body, it has come out and said that these are the figures. But let me tell you one more thing. If you look at Modi government's efforts across all sectors, particularly the rural sector, where rural and the service sector and manufacturing sector, particularly the manufacturing sector, where Mudra Yojana had about 3.49 crore recipients of loans from 50,000 to 10 lakhs.
But
believe me, all that money has gone to those recipients, which has in turn created employment.
We don't know that.
Now, how does
we don't know how many jobs Mudra has created.
Yes, there are 3.49.
But we don't know how many jobs Mudra has created.
It is obvious. No.
Well, it's not obvious because the government has actually set up. The government has actually set up a separate Labour Bureau survey to monitor how many jobs Mudra has created. That report is not out yet.
If you don't have hard statistics, Vasu, if you don't have hard statistics to assess employment or unemployment, but you have people investing on their own businesses to the extent of 3.49 recipients.
Amit Basole, last word to you.
Obviously, it must have had an
impact.
Vivek,
allow me.
We're
running out of time.
The highest money is spent on Manrega by this government.
Vivek, I need to go to Amit for the last word.
This will have a positive impact on employment.
May I make one point? Okay.
Amit.
May I make one point? The only reason we do not have hard statistics is because the government is not giving them to us.
Exactly. Amit, very, very
It
quickly,
is not
in
so.
conclusion,
Madam, it was not so. Let
I
me
want to
tell
ask you that this is a
there
problem
was no
where it's
basis for
unfortunate, if you
collecting
can just
all
silence
these
Vivek at his
facts.
mic,
So
if we
you
can
should
just
the-
ask you, Amit Basole, that the last point is that it's unfortunate that this becomes politically partisan, because as your own findings suggest, this is a problem that will affect any government that comes in.
Yes, precisely. I think I would really underline this fact that the last couple of years the job debate has become very politicized and polarized. But this is not a new problem. India has had this problem for many years.
Right.
The previous governments had to fight the same problem. We are in a new regime where a lot of value-added growth, GDP growth occurs without
Sure.
commensurate growth in employment, and we've known this for many years. So I think we need to be realistic about what are the concrete ways in which we can create employment, rather than getting stuck in the debate over whether data is available or not. As Jayati also pointed out at the beginning, data is essential to any policy making. We have data, it's not like we don't. Sometimes we have unofficial data, sometimes
Sure.
we have official data. Even without data, we know that it's a big problem.
Okay,
And
so I think
we
that's
need
an important-
to move into the solution phase quickly.
Right, and we should also focus more on that as well, which we will. But thank you all so much for joining us. That's all the time we have on Reality Check. Thanks so much for watching. Good night.